Commissioner Duggar. Commissioner Hartmeyer-Prigg.
Here.
Commissioner Hassan.
Here, present.
Commissioner Kimmy.
Here.
Commissioner Teeter.
Here.
Chair Tivnon.
Here.
Mayor Beatty. Commissioner Kim. Okay. Commissioner Walton.
Here.
Commissioner Ulvin.
Present.
And I had down that Commissioner Vitko was absent tonight in Mexico or someplace warm and sunny.
Great. Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to visitor comments first on the agenda. Visitor comments allows visitors to speak to the Bureau Board about matters not included on tonight's agenda for a public hearing. There are no public hearings tonight. If you wish to speak on a matter, now is your time. Recording Secretary, do we have anyone here to address the Bureau Board?
No, Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay, we're going to move on to board communications. I just want to take a moment while we're on the subject to thank everybody for being here. This is our very first in-person meeting in the entire time I've been serving on council. So I think for most of us in this room, this might be the first time we're actually seeing each other face to face, which is great. So here's to having a really productive night tonight. Do any board members have any information that they would like to share with the rest of the board and the interim executive director? Okay, seeing none. We do not have minutes to consider for tonight, so we're going to move on to the business portion of the agenda. The first and only item on the agenda is a work session, Bureau Bill 2023-67, Bureau 5-Year Plan Strategic Priorities Work Session. Tonight is the first Bureau meeting we have in person in the form of a hybrid meeting, allowing board members to either be in council chambers or on Zoom. The board has felt it important to meet in person for this work session as Bureau's consultant team, staff, and board discuss Bureau's ongoing short and long-term path. I would like to welcome Nick Popnik, Elaine Howard, and their team for preparing and joining us in person and facilitating tonight's work session. Thank you. It's important for us to remember that this is not a goal-setting retreat like the City Council recently completed. Bureau's Central Beaverton Urban Renewal Plan goals were approved by the voters in 2011. The consultant team and staff will lead Bureau through an agenda that will ultimately break us out into 2 small groups to discuss projects and programs to help build a 5-year action plan. This will not be any action, or there will not be any action required on tonight's work session. The team will be coming back to Bureau in January. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to Tyler.
Thank you, Chair.
Tyler.
Tyler Ryerson, the Bureau Staff Liaison, and as Chair noted, it's the first time many of you have been in person for Bureau. As we've been sitting here talking this evening, February 2020 was the last time we actually met in person. And Nick said that he was here for a city council meeting that same time frame. It was the last council meeting for going off into COVID world. And then Nick came back and was our first Bureau online session. So I guess welcome, and we appreciate it. Tonight is a kind of a fun night, and I appreciate everyone having the opportunity to be with us because we're at the halfway point, essentially, with the plan. The plan was approved in 2011, and we've reached over our maximum indebtedness halfway mark here recently. The 5-year action plan that was approved in 2020, back when we were just talking about, is needing to be updated. And we've had little snippets of conversations this past year during Bureau during Bureau meetings, but we haven't ever crossed that finish line. So as we've been thinking about it, it's like, you know, what better way to actually have a conversation and be in person first time to talk about where we are, where we need to go, where we should be going in the coming 5 years. So at the end of the night, what will happen is we'll be in 2 breakout groups. We'll have one over here at the Cecil, and the other one will be sort of over here by Board Member Kimmy. And we'll make some room. But Elaine and Nick will be walking us through quickly a bunch of slides. It's important for these bunch of slides is because we're actually trying to remember and maybe educate what this urban renewal thing is that the voters approved. And we need to have direction. So as we go through the slides, please feel free to think about your questions, write your questions down, but I would like to have the consultants just speedily go through them. Otherwise, we're probably going to take a lot more time than necessary. So hold your questions until we get through. There will be a tag team between myself, Nick, and Elaine, but hopefully something grabs your interest and we finally get to the breakout groups, talk about projects forthcoming. Okay? There's some water and some snacks over at the table. Feel free to walk over and grab those. Okay. We're ready for the PowerPoint, Jessica. Okay, next slide, please. So here we are for tonight. As Chair Tivnon also mentioned, this is not a goal-setting opportunity. This is like a retreat. This is a work session. And the plan was actually had goals in them. And that was what was approved by the voters. And so we're just finessing what we've accomplished and what we have not, and going back and looking at those goals. We're going to talk a little bit about how urban renewal works. You've heard a little bit, but we're going to remind you and make sure we answer your questions about urban renewal in the state of Oregon. A little bit about our Central Beaverton Urban Renewal Plan and what are its limitations. We'll get into financial capacity of the urban renewal area and where we are. And then the last part will be the potential projects, programs, and future considerations. When we go into these groups, we'll be there for about 40 minutes, and then we'll come out and we'll report out. We have you already broken out into these two groups, so we'll identify that once we get there. But feel free to be jotting down your thoughts as we roll into those groups. But ultimately, we'll come out, we'll do a report out, and then we'll take your thoughts. We'll spend December, part of January, trying to figure out what it all means, and we'll come back in January on the 23rd, and that will be starting the forming of the 5-year action plan. Next slide. So this is what it looks like. Kind of talked about most of that. Focus on number 6, small group discussion. Those are your questions. And we'll repeat the questions at the end tonight, and we'll have them in the actual work groups. So just kind of start familiarizing yourself with the questions. I'm not going to go through them. And then, again, January and then February, we'll present that final action plan. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine.
Next slide, please. Good evening. I'm Elaine Howard. I'm a consultant who works solely in urban renewal and have been doing so since 2006. And I've worked with Nick's firm for the last decade on, I think we're over 150 different urban renewal projects that we've worked on. So we know and understand urban renewal well. So I'm going to go through some urban renewal basics. Next slide, please. And urban renewal is a funding tool in Oregon for economic development to implement adopted urban renewal plans. An urban renewal area is established by the City Council adopting an urban renewal plan. Revenues are generated through what's called tax increment financing, and with that, it happens through when an urban renewal area is established. A frozen base of assessed value is established at that same time by the county assessor. Any increase in that assessed value over the lifetime of an urban renewal is called increment, and the taxes off of that increment are then funneled to the urban renewal agency to do projects, programs, and administration. The consolidated tax rate is generally limited to permanent rate levies, excluding, so not including, GO bonds or local option levies. And that's important to know because some older urban renewal areas actually do impact those. Yours does not impact those. TIF equals your increment value, so that increased assessed value, times that consolidated tax rate to give you the amount of money that you get every year from the county assessor. Revenue sharing is a relatively new concept in urban renewal, and it happens when an urban renewal area is able to produce an amount of revenue that is established by statute, and when it hits that mark, that amount over that mark is shared with the overlapping taxing districts. So that was something that was put into the statute as a request of the different special taxing districts, and we can talk about that more later when we get into financing. Next slide, please. This just shows you that concept in a graph form, so that frozen base assessed value, so the assessed value of the area at the time it's adopted is shown in the dark blue. The gold is the increment, that's the increase assessed value, and the taxes off of that increase assessed value. And then just that little green portion at the bottom is that amount of money that eventually could be shared with the overlapping taxing districts if your area becomes very successful. At the end of an urban renewal area, the goal is that that assessed value has increased dramatically, and that all of that increased assessed value is then used by all of the different taxing districts to be able to provide their services. Next slide. Urban renewal does not increase property taxes for property owners. The burden of urban renewal is on impacted taxing jurisdictions. It doesn't impact their tax rates, but what it means is, on that last slide, any of the taxes off of that increased assessed value does not go to that taxing district for the lifetime of the urban renewal area. It is diverted to the urban renewal area and agency. Every dollar of TIF is a dollar of foregone revenue, so it just means anything in that gold area is revenue that the other taxing districts, including the city itself, does not get. Schools are not directly impacted by urban renewal. That is because they are funded through the state school fund on a per pupil basis. And urban renewal does not, for especially your area, does not impact those local option levies either. So although the state school fund is impacted by an urban renewal area, the legislature establishes that per pupil formula and backfills the money that doesn't go into that state school fund from those property taxes by other revenue resources. Next slide. There are limitations on urban renewal. Only cities and counties in Oregon may establish an urban renewal area. For cities larger than 50,000, you may have no more in population, you may have no more than 15% of your assessed value and 15% of your acreage in an urban renewal area. On the chart below, it shows you that right now you have 7.9%, so about half of your available acreage in urban renewal, and you have 6.8% of your assessed value. What that means is at some time in the future, you wanted to establish another urban renewal area at the same time this one was ongoing. You have the capacity through the statutory limitations to do that. You're using approximately half of your capacity, both for acreage and for assessed value. Next slide. Other limitations, tax increment revenue may only be spent on debt, but the term of debt is fairly broad, and it can include like contract debt or purchase order debt, or it can be bonded debt or taking out a loan from a bank, but it is required, your spending has to be required through a debt instrument of some sort. Projects funded through TIF must be capital projects, so not operations and maintenance. They must be located inside the urban renewal area and benefiting the urban renewal area. They need to be identified in the urban renewal plan, and there are new specific requirements for any public building projects in urban renewal areas. So if you have one in your existing plan now, a public building project, and it doesn't change much, you're allowed to continue doing that. If in the future you ever added a public building project or changed it dramatically, you would have to conform with the new public building requirements. Each urban renewal area must have a maximum indebtedness. That is the controlling feature of urban renewal in Oregon. The maximum indebtedness is sometimes referred to as MI, maximum indebtedness, and it is the total amount of money you may spend on projects, programs, and administration throughout the life of an urban renewal area. Your maximum indebtedness is $150 million. There are restrictions on the initial size of maximum indebtedness in areas, and there are restrictions on future increases in acreage within your existing area. So your existing area may expand by only 20% of its acreage, its original acreage. There is no provision in statute to increase above that amount. Your maximum indebtedness may also be increased. It has to be done through a substantial amendment, which is similar to the same process as an original urban renewal plan. So it's a lengthy process that includes a lot of public input. It can be voted on by your city council to a certain limit. If you exceed that limit on a maximum indebtedness increase, then you have to have concurrence from taxing districts as specified in the statute. So there's an amount, a smaller amount that you may increase on your own after going through the whole process, and the city council makes that increase, and a larger amount that you may only access if you get concurrence. Next slide. Your city charter, not all city charters in Oregon have this, but your city charter requires that an urban renewal plan be voted on by your electorate. And it also requires that the agency board shall not be comprised exclusively of council members. So I would say over 80% of the urban renewal agencies in Oregon are just the city council members. So having anybody on that the agency who isn't a city council member is different from many other cities, but it is the way you operate, and I think it works very well for you. There are voter limitations. So statements made in the city's voters pamphlet when this was originally approved in 2011, asking for approval of the plan are material statements to be used in interpreting the plan. So if you made statements in that voter's pamphlet, those are hard and fast rules, and they may only be changed through another vote of your electorate. So that is also something that other cities don't have as a restriction, so something that you always have to remember when you are making decisions about your own plan. And for Borough, the city included the amount of funding for specific categories of projects within your plan in that voter's pamphlet. So sometimes, excuse me. Sometimes those categories in a plan maybe change the amount of funding that's allocated. But since those were specifically identified in your voter's pamphlet, it has been interpreted that you have to stick with that allocation throughout the lifetime of the urban renewal area. Plan amendments on an urban renewal plan have to be done in a specific way. The statute defines what are substantial amendments in an urban renewal plan. So adding any acreage over 1% of your original acreage has to be that substantial amendment. So going through the full process of an urban renewal plan. Increasing the maximum indebtedness also has to. Adding certain types of public buildings and requirements of a substantial amendment must be adopted in the same manner. We went through that. That matter, the process is an agency meeting, a planning commission meeting, a public hearing, a presentation to the county, and adoption by the city council of a non-emergency ordinance, which may be referred to voters. You also have to have your substantial amendments approved by voters, so that is a process requirement for you in any case. Minor amendments are things that aren't those substantial amendments in your plan, and those may be approved by resolution of the Borough Board. Next slide, please. So what does success or failure look like? Failure of an urban renewal area is a lack of private development, a lack of public investment, generating less TIF revenue than forecast, collecting TIF and holding it without investing it. So I have some urban renewal areas that really have been able to do nothing or have decided to do nothing. I have other areas where the board has decided that they want to just hold their money until they get more money. And holding your money loses value of that money because of inflation. So we've had to talk with them about when you have that money, the earlier you do projects, the more projects you can do because of the impact of inflation over time. Success is growing the tax base. That's one of the goals of any urban renewal area. Funding project concepts in your plan, and you have specific goals in your plan, and you have specific projects identified. Collecting more TIF than forecast, or the amount of TIF that's forecast. And realizing change while mitigating your impacts. So making sure that you are cognizant of your impacts. You do have an equity plan. So making sure that you are not impacting groups either knowingly or unknowingly that should not be impacted. Next slide. There are lots of examples of great urban renewal areas also. These are just a few examples. The Hood River waterfront is an example where the urban renewal area was basically used just for infrastructure. And all of that private development that occurred because the infrastructure was put in that allowed that development to happen. Before we did that plan, there was not the road network, there was not water lines, sewer lines, stormwater lines. All of that was put in through the urban renewal area. And that, I don't know if you've been to the Hood River waterfront, but it is beautiful. It has a lot of jobs. And the waterfront park itself is a great amenity for both tourists and the city. Lake Oswego has done a great job of doing public-private partnerships where they have bought land, put that land out similar to your agency has bought land, solicited developers, been able to develop property in the means that, or in the manner that they want it developed. So mixed use, residential included, increasing that tax base. Wilsonville has two existing plans that are getting ready to expire. One in the downtown where they were able to put in significant public amenities for the community and significant transportation improvements. And then I don't know if you know the Villebois neighborhood, but that neighborhood was nothing before the urban renewal area went in. It was a former state mental hospital that was totally reinvigorated through the use of urban renewal, again, mostly putting in transportation, water, sewer, infrastructure, but also a series of parks to help make that neighborhood, a very dense neighborhood, make it be successful. Next slide. We're moving to the next section, background. So this was what your ballot measure was that adopted your plan November 8th, 2011. And the ballot title was to approve the Central Beaverton Urban Renewal Plan referred by City Council. Next slide. This is your area. I'm sure most of you have seen this map. The measure that was approved by the voters contains the framework necessary to establish and carry out urban renewal projects in the Central Beaverton area. It includes defined urban renewal area boundaries, the maximum indebtedness of $150 million, guiding goals, allocation percentages for project categories, and a 30-year sunset date. That sunset date has a lot of language around it, so it's not a hard fast at the end of 30 years you end, but it is a provision that you should not be taking out any more long-term debt that cannot be paid off after that 30-year time period. Next slide. There are sub-areas within your urban renewal area. So there's your transit-oriented area, It's an area of highest priority for investments during the last 5 years to capitalize on high-capacity transit, community assets, increased developer interest, and the development of Bureau's parking garage. And then there's your Old Town area, where the focus has been mainly through incentive programs and catalytic housing. The employment area, which is the largest investment through transportation improvements, that's shown in green. And the commercial office and retail area has seen very little of Bureau investment to date. Next slide. And 997 total acres, so a fairly large urban renewal area. Your Bureau governance, your board is your decision-making body. It is comprised of the mayor, city council, and 4 community appointees. You have an urban renewal advisory committee that advises the Bureau board. There are 13 community committee members on 3-year appointments. You have a Bureau budget committee that reviews and recommends Bureau's budget to the board, and the board to Bureau board, and 11 appointees on the budget committee. Your staff implements and manages your Bureau projects. So you have Executive Director Weinheimer, Legal Counsel Kirby, Treasurer Lauchner, and additional staff to implement the Bureau's goals. Next slide. These are the goals that are in your urban renewal plan. There are a lot of objectives under these goals, but the main goals are engagement, to inform, communicate, and seek engagement for decision-making to reflect community values and priorities, to add value to our city by increasing property values through community investments towards a healthy economy, business support all businesses in creating and retaining jobs to attract a diverse local workforce, redevelopment to promote redevelopment that fits the character of the Beaverton community vision, transportation, expand the existing transportation system to promote a safe, interconnected walking, biking, transit, and street network, housing, increase housing in the urban renewal district, and finally, arts and culture to promote community, public art, and culture in the district to provide destinations that support a vibrant center. Next slide. I'm handing off to Nick.
Thank you, Elaine. As Tyler said, Nick Popenook with Tiberius Solutions. I've been doing urban renewal and other public finance work for close to the last 20 years. Bear with me tonight. I'm getting over, or have mostly gotten over, a cold that my kid brought me home from daycare for Thanksgiving. I've never been accused of being too quiet before, so even though I've lost my voice, I think everyone will still be able to hear me. We focus on the financial analysis. This slide is showing the allocation of expenditures to each category of project that was approved by voters in your plan. The pie on the left, which looks ever so slightly different from the pie on the right, the left is showing what was approved by voters, and, no, that's what's showing, left is showing what's actually been spent, the right is showing what was approved by voters. And a couple of things that have already been brought up about what makes your plan unique is that these allocations are binding for you because they were voted on. Most every other urban renewal plan out there, staff and the advisory board can make decisions on an annual basis to choose which projects they're funding as long as those projects are on the list. You have these more tight constraints based on that voter approval. Something else that is unique about your plan is that your approved projects are fairly broad. These are overarching categories of projects and aren't specific projects and activities. So you do have wiggle room within those categories, but the broad categories are firm. The largest category here being transportation and infrastructure, which represents roughly half of the total amount of expenditures that can take place in this plan. Next slide. This table is showing very much the same information that was on those previous pie charts, but I like to see the specific dollar amounts. These dollar amounts are from 6 months ago, so they have fluctuated a little bit since then. There's some other nuances if you compare it to your audits, things like program income, which we'll talk about in a moment, that aren't being reflected here. But overall, it's showing that you've spent roughly $70 million of that maximum indebtedness, with roughly $80 million remaining And so far, things have been occurring more or less according to that overall allocation. You're not too far ahead or too far behind in any one specific category. Again, transportation and infrastructure is the largest one, with roughly $40 million of remaining maximum indebtedness capacity dedicated to it. And then the joint investment program, second to that, with nearly $25 million of remaining capacity allocated to it. The incentive programs and community identity building are significantly smaller, but still have millions of dollars of remaining potential there. Next slide. This slide summarizes the previous 5-year action plan. So obviously you can't see the details on the screen here, but what it looked like at its core was a table showing those 5 categories of projects and 5 years of expenditures, and breaking down into greater detail, more granularity within each of those categories, what projects you plan on spending those dollars on over those years. It's important to note that on a year-to-year basis, you don't need to have that same percentage allocation. So you can spend a lot more on infrastructure in one year and less in another year, as long as at the end of the life of the district, you've achieved the allocation that was approved by voters. Also, the total amount of expenditures vary substantially from one year to the next. That's because you don't just have your cash flow, but you have the ability to take on debt, take out loans. And so in this example, you can see that there was a plan for a borrowing early on in the life of the district. And so there was $27 million of expenditure in one of these years that was planned, only $4 million of expenditures planned in later years. So there can certainly be a lot of volatility on a year-to-year basis, both in the total amount of projects that are funded and in the types of activities that are funded. And because of that, oh yes, go ahead, Elaine.
I see a lot of people looking for that. It's page 91 in the packet. So you have a copy of it.
And so there is a lot of volatility that can happen from one year to the next, and that is why having a 5-year plan can be important. If you're looking just at an annual budget cycle, there's a lot of big decisions to be made each year, but looking ahead for 5 years can give you more strategic guidance on where these dollars need to go over time. Next slide. So this says we're coming to the financial framework section. Those last few slides felt an awful lot like financial framework as well, just the way we structured the PowerPoint. When we're talking about the finances of urban renewal, we talk an awful lot about property tax revenue and about the assessed value that generates that property tax revenue. One thing we look at when we're looking at the growth in property values over time is a 3% trend line. That's because due to the state's property tax system, there's a disconnect between real market values and assessed values cannot increase by more than 3% per year for any property unless you have new construction taking place on it. So it's kind of the baseline that we expect to see if you've got a fully built out neighborhood that doesn't have new construction going on, but it's not blighted or languishing. You'd expect to see 3% per year, sort of like clockwork. That's that lowest line on the chart. Then we see the dotted orange line. That's the growth in assessed value that's been happening over the last decade for the city of Beaverton overall. And it's been going up by more than 3% because you do have new construction taking place across the city. And then you have the dark solid, maybe purple line. That's the actual growth in assessed value for this urban renewal area. You can actually see that in the early years, it was not only below the city as a whole, but below that 3% trend line. There was very little growth happening in this area. It truly was a blighted area that was struggling to achieve just the bare minimum amount of assessed value growth that you see everywhere across the state. Due to the investments that Bureau had been able to make in this area, it has recovered. And over the mid parts of the 20-teens, it caught up to the growth that was happening citywide. And in recent years, it has pulled ahead of what's been going on citywide. That's even muted a little bit by the fact that recent development projects in the area have been receiving property tax abatement programs. And so not all of that value has even shown up on the tax roll yet. And in coming years, you'll see more growth showing up on this chart from buildings that have already been completed but haven't fully come on the tax rolls. So this is showing a success story there. Those three lines look very close to each other, but the difference from being below 3% per year in the beginning to being above the city's trend line, up over around 4 or 5% per year in recent years is significant. And if that continues, you'll just further and further outpace what would have been happening in an area without investment. Next slide. So the Westgate site is just an example of that, the difference of what happens if properties are left to languish versus if Bura gets involved and provides investment to make development happen here. So this was a site that the city purchased even before this urban renewal area existed back in 2005 for, I think, $4.9 million. It was redeveloped much later than that with support from Bura. The current assessed value on the tax rolls is only $12 million, but again, that's due to a lot of that value receiving the benefit of tax abatements, so more value will be coming online in the future. The real market value of this property, there's 3 different tax lots that used to be the Westgate site, they combine for over $100 million. So there's been over a 20-time increase in value of this property. When you're talking about real market value, assessed value has not jumped up that much yet, but it will continue to grow as these abatements come to an end. So Bura definitely has the ability to take a dirt lot and turn it into something that's much more productive, a much more positive benefit for the community and for the tax rolls. Next slide. So these are the revenues that are generated from that growth in assessed value. You can see going back to 2013, virtually no revenue being generated here. Over time, that has steadily grown as the assessed values have grown, and we're seeing now in the current fiscal year expecting $7 million in annual tax revenues. So for this area to take basically over the course of the last decade, going from nothing to $7 million of tax revenue per year, that's pretty remarkable growth. And that speaks to both the ability of this area to invest in projects that establish or that allow new development to occur, and just the large size of this area to begin with that allows it to capture a relatively small percentage growth and turn it into large numbers on tax revenue. Next slide. So we updated our forecast for tax increment revenues in this area. I won't go over all these bullet points, but it's a conservative forecast that just assumes 3% growth per year for these properties, plus the known projects that we already know have recently been completed or are currently under construction. And from that, we know of over $100 million of new construction activity taking place right now in the area. That's going to lead to only a little over $7 million of new assessed value in the immediate future, this 5-year period that we're looking at, because, again, of those tax abatement programs. But we also know that during that period of time, there's $16 million of assessed value from things that were already built that hasn't shown up on the assessed value tax roll yet and will be coming on the tax roll in that period of time. So there's this bit of this built-in delay, but for our analysis, we're only looking at those immediate projects that are currently under construction. So a conservative forecast that we see on the next slide here. So even with that conservative assumption, we still show that historical trend line largely continuing forward. So going from $7 million of assessed value today to over $10 million of assessed value in 2029. So that steadily increasing amount of assessed or tax increment revenue in the area. Next. All right, we're definitely not going to go into the details of this slide tonight. This just shows the city's fund structure for Bura. And the important thing to take away here is that as you come up with priorities for how Bura should be spending its money in future years, there will be a lot of nuance in the actual budgeting to make that happen. And there are different funds that are best for certain types of revenues and certain types of expenditures, and you have the staff in place to be able to leverage all of these different funds effectively to accomplish your goals and accomplish the projects that you identify in the 5-year plan. So there's lots of details that go on in that budgeting process, and you've got a pretty sophisticated fund structure, but there's a reason for all of that, one of which is to separate your tax increment revenues, which have very specific restrictions, from your program income, other types of revenues that have different restrictions on them, which I think is our next slide. Hey, I got it right. So program income. We talk about program income a fair amount. The overwhelming amount of revenue that your tax increment area is receiving is tax increment. That makes sense. That's from the growth in property tax revenues that we've talked about. But that's not the only revenue that an area can receive. You can also receive money from land sales from property that you own, from rent from property that you own and rent out to private businesses. You may have loan programs like a storefront improvement program, and as properties participate in that, they pay those revenues back to you. Parking garage revenue. All of those other sources of revenue we refer to as program income. And they're important because they are not limited in the same way that tax increment financing is. Your tax increment is limited to that maximum indebtedness. It's limited to that specific allocation of projects that were approved by voters. But these other revenues coming in are not limited in those ways. And so as this area matures, one thing that will be interesting is to see if you can really maximize those other sources of funds long term, and that'll give you a separate source of revenue that you can use to continue doing economic development activities in this area that is not dependent on the property tax revenues. That allows the tax increment to sunset and for the affected taxing districts to no longer be negatively impacted by the foregone revenues here, but you still have revenue coming in that you've collected other ways that are funding those activities long term. Not a ton of it. There's a lot here from rents, from land sales, from loan repayments, and now a growing source of revenue from the parking garage operations. Next slide. Yeah. So it is restricted to anything that statutes allow urban renewal agencies to do. Urban renewal, the laws that establish urban renewal agencies give fairly broad powers, but they're largely related to economic development, infrastructure, and housing. But it's pretty broad language. This slide here talks about the specific best practices for using it. One of the most obvious ways to use it is to use it to fund specific projects that are identified in your plan. So it's within the plan boundary, and it's a project that's on that list, and spending it on something like that, very easy to do, very clearly an allowed use of it. You can use this program income outside of the boundary of the urban renewal area, and you can use it for things that aren't identified specifically in your plan, as long as they're things that are consistent with what statute says urban renewal agencies can do. In order to make that happen, you want to make sure you get legal advice to say, yes, we think this is appropriate, and then you likely need to have your city council, actually, not the Bureau Board, but city council, take action and say, we are specifically directing our urban renewal agency to carry out this mission or this project. And if you have that legal opinion and you've got that action by your city council, then that gives you the ability to spend your program income in that way. So cleanest if it's something that's in your plan, but you do have more flexibility than that. Yeah, so your urban renewal district doesn't necessarily sunset. Your urban renewal area might sunset. And so as long as your urban renewal district, the urban renewal agency doesn't sunset. So the district can close down, but the agency still exists. And as long as the agency exists, these revenues are revenues for the agency. And that's how the agency can continue to use them even after the district itself closes down. If the urban renewal agency itself terminates, which is something that some jurisdictions do, then yes, all remaining resources of the agency, all resources and obligations wind up being inherited by the city's general fund. One key thing is we always like to keep the program income separate from your tax increment financing. Once you start to commingle those dollars, it gets very difficult to know whether an expenditure should count against your maximum indebtedness or not count against it because it was funded by something else. Yeah, Allison?
You just made me think of something I think is worth noting. So the money that Bureau can spend is not on operations and maintenance. You said that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that does get moved over into the general obligation for the city. So when you do, like, say, those transportation improvements in that, on Western Avenue, maintaining those transportation improvements become the responsibility of the city.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So capital projects you could pay for with the tax increment, but not the maintenance of it. There may be some instances in which program income could contribute to that, but legal counsel would need to weigh in on that. We're going to keep moving because we want to make sure we save time for the actual small group discussion so we don't take too many questions during the presentation. So the next slide.
Just a quick reminder, please be sure to turn your mic on because our TVC-TV people will not be able to hear you.
All right, so here's where we get to the forecast of how much capacity we think this district might have over the next 5 years. This shows the tax increment revenues increasing from $7 million a year to over $10 million a year. It shows program income being around $500,000 in the current year or the next year, but growing to over $1 million per year long term. So over the next 5 years, we're forecasting $47 million of total revenue generated by this area. All of that revenue, though, is not available to spend on any project that you might want. You have some outstanding obligations already. The two that we've highlighted here are debt service, which is a really firm obligation. You have to pay that debt back on schedule. So that's $2.7 million per year of this revenue. And then administrative costs. There's, in theory, some more wiggle room there, but the administrative costs really are what they are to keep this agency running. And so when you factor in those two items, you wind up with about $24 million of remaining capacity over that next 5-year period. So $4 to $5 million of capacity per year to spend on projects. Some of those dollars are maybe softly spoken for. There's maybe not a budget adopted for that future year, but you already have projects in mind, ongoing programs that you've been spending money on every year that you'd like to continue. And so when you think about how you spend these dollars might disappear faster than you think when you think about the existing soft obligations that you've already made in those future years. Next slide is an alternate version of this forecast, and it says, well, what if you borrowed money to increase the amount of short-term financial capacity that you have? This shows a potential $20 million a year borrowing. That certainly increases the amount of funding capacity you would have in that next year. That shows 2025, now your capacity increases to over $20 million that you could spend on projects in that year. So that's great. It accelerates the timing that you can invest in large projects in the district. But by doing so, you've taken on more debt, and that comes at the cost of future debt service payments. And that means that in future years, you now have less capacity in those later years to spend on projects because you have to make additional debt service payments. And when you have ongoing programmatic costs, ongoing overhead costs, ongoing costs to operate the parking garage, you need to make sure that you've got enough extra cash flow on an annual basis above and beyond your debt service payments so that you can pay for those annual recurring expenditures. That's not saying that there's an obvious right or wrong choice on incurring debt. It can be a very valuable instrument, very valuable tool, but it has to be considered against your other long-term programmatic expenditures. And then the next slide. All right, I'm turning it back over to Tyler.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so what we're going to do is just kind of talk about what are those projects and programs that we have already are working on or have established, and for your consideration as we break out into smaller groups. And then we'll talk about briefly of things that we have not touched on, and we'll break those out into some allocations. There is a matrix that is on your table. This might be a good reference. I'm not following along this, but it might be something for you to hold on to now and into the small groups. So funding commitments that we've been going through here, building improvement grants. So we know about the storefront and tenant improvement programs. Open Air Beaverton did a little bit of work during COVID. Redevelopment grants, that's to those projects that go, gosh, I want to do something on my property, not sure what to do, or I really do know what I want to do, but I'm looking for some assistance to figure out what the look and feel could be. How many units could I get onto a piece of property? And so it's a small grant program that Janine runs. Parking management program. So we have the garage and we have the on-street parking compliance program. Those things we have committed to. Property management. We bought up a lot of properties here recently, and some of those properties still have buildings. Some of them have weeds on them that need to be kept down, along with the parking garage. I think that is that. Next slide, please. We know of the 5 properties that we've purchased, and this is the portfolio strategy. BC2, Beaver Dam West, Lombard West, Buffet Palace, Broadway East Lot, 5 sites. that are waiting for us to solicit. And as you may remember, we're looking at the Lombard West and the Broadway East as our first solicitations in 2024. Recently, we received a Metro grant for $500,000 that will help us with due diligence and community engagement on the Lombard West site. Next slide, please. So we have the garage, as we know, ground floor retail. Can't forget about that as we tenantize the retail space. We have 2 leases that are in and running. We have a letter of intent that will be coming to you in the form of a lease, hopefully in early 2024 for a restaurant. The parking program, of course, we've talked about, and there's a couple of plans that are in the works or recently completed, and that's the downtown parking management plan, action plan, and also the downtown Beaverton Parks and Open Space framework that we were working with THPRD that council recently approved. Next slide. The Loop. We've heard about it, and the Hall Watson project that is out there thinking of where we're going next. It's going to be a very expensive project, and it could be Bureau money could help leverage for other money, and so that's something for us to keep in consideration as we continue on trying to figure out how we phase that project and how that will look and feel in the years to come if we so elect. ODOT has been talking on and off about Canyon Road project. Many of us have had heard those conversations over time. More to come. Western Avenue has been finishing up, as we know, and Vera, contributed a little bit, both on the design and on construction, but not a lot. Creek stormwater improvements. Jeff has been working with Clean Water Services and trying to figure out how we figure out the stormwater master plan downtown in the urban renewal area. We still have work to do there, but we started a sub-basin strategy at one point that needs more work. Again, we talked about downtown parking and improved routes to parking. Next slide, please. Arts and Innovation District. If you remember in our budgets, we had an Arts and Innovation District plan that should be launching in this particular Beaverton Central area. It's been something we've been talking about for quite a while now, and we just need to start thinking about, do we want to continue on of this particular idea? And it is an area that we think will help lead to a more successful and more dynamic projects at the BC2 and the Beaver Dam West sites, along with continuing to grow the round Beaverton Central. Hall Crescent art installation is part of the garage and PRCA, and a little bit more to finish up there. There's general streetscape enhancements. There's the potential for the First Street Dining Commons. Vera's listened to the presentation last month. Councils will be hearing a presentation in December, so more to come with potential what might be First Street Dining Commons or First Street Commons. Strategic property acquisition. We've bought a lot of properties. Do we want to continue to purchase properties in order to help formulate our own destiny as a community? And then the one that we want to also always keep in mind is affordable housing. And that's an area that always needs significant assistance. It's called out in our plan. If we are to solicit for some of these properties, we need to be going, what can we bring to the table as an agency? Next slide, please. The downtown equity strategy was approved a year ago, and in there's a lot of different strategies, and we are working on a couple of those. As one that comes to mind right now is construction disruption assistance. A lot of projects that are happening. Beaverton High School is going to be starting construction here in the spring, and what does that kind of impact to our businesses? And so we want to be on the forefront. There's a couple projects under construction now that is causing some heartache with some businesses, and so we are trying to get ahead of that. We saw with the PRC and the garage and the Crescent Street closures, how that disruption of construction can really impact businesses. And so we were helping out some of those smaller businesses during that construction. Business organizing, business technical assistance, tenant and homeowner support, reestablishment policies that we need to keep a focus on. Next slide, please. Okay, here's our 48% things we have not done a lot on, and the matrix should be helpful here a little bit more. Sidewalk infill, we've done some. We expect more to come with the loop, and as Milliken comes to light. Utility upgrades, that's another area, and undergrounding utilities, but we have not done a lot on except for specific projects. Redevelopment projects that are coming, that's a good area to focus in on. The West Gate site across tracks here, there was 2 streets built, and in those 2 streets included infrastructure. One of the things that we did with the Westgate site was determine what made more sense. Would we build the streets, or does the developer build the streets? And we help by offsetting that through other means. So they built the streets. We were able to write down the land value itself. We did some SDC assistance, and we wrote down 15 units in the ARC Central for affordability. And so ultimately, having 230 units, 15 of them affordable, retail, 125 key urban-style hotel, pretty amazing for our little investment, which has a value of $110 million now. Next slide, please. 33% the joint investment area, things that we haven't spent a lot of time on, increasing capacity of jobs. Of course, our idea with the BC2 and the developer that we were working with prior to COVID, it was a lot of office and arts and innovation. That was the focus, and that's why we love that project. And things were pulled out from underneath us with COVID. So where's the jobs? What's the employment area? West 5, counselors, you've been out on a tour of West 5, and that's maybe an area that we want to invest in. And inclusive and affordable commercial spaces. Again, that's what we're trying to do with the garage retail because we can control that. We don't want to undercut the market for the leases, but we want to be able to help establish some of those businesses that may not have been able to get into bricks and mortar on their own. Next slide. Historic building conservation, community ownership. Again, the building improvement program has done quite a bit with some historic buildings, but we don't actually have a historic conservation program. And so that might be a decision that we want to make. But there has been not only improvements to these buildings, that's our infrastructure. That's some of our key building infrastructures that we have in our downtown that are not being knocked down. And we're able to have small businesses to grow and be supportive of each other and making it a vibrant place. And then it's kind of the same thing with the community ownership that's called out in the downtown equity strategy. Next slide, please. 4% on the community identity. And that's the gateways. It's signage. It's identifiable landmarks. How do we market this area that we are growing? Streetscape improvements. We've done a little bit of curb extensions, traffic calming, street lighting. Those are all part of that streetscape improvement that we can be thinking of. And then creek enhancements. We've done 0, except for associated with the garage and the reeser, and a little bit wetland mitigation there. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Elaine, I believe.
So these are our next steps. We are today giving you the status update and getting some input from you on our project categories and potential projects. And from that, we'll come back in January and develop some priorities for spending over a 5-year time frame But today we're mostly just going to be talking about our existing projects and getting some input generally from you. So in January, we'll have another work session to talk about 5-year plan expenditure priorities and program income language. In February, we hope to come back to you with a draft 5-year plan for you to review and for you to then update that every 1 to 2 years. So that's where we're going. And next slide. Next slide, please. So, and if we could keep this up during the small group, that would be great. So we're going to break into small groups, and you're going to take your little sheet that Cassandra's holding up that has your projects identified, and we're going to leave these questions up. We have the projects in the categories that are listed within your plan and that were listed within the ballot measure so that we can review those categories. And the questions that we want you to consider in looking at each separate category, so we'll start with the first one, is Borough achieving the plan goals with the projects and programs? Are there questions about the projects? Are there projects that you think are no longer relevant or should be removed? Or are there projects that you think should be added? Is there continued support for those ongoing projects? So some of that programmatic spending that is being done. And if not, what's the issue? Why don't you want to have support so that we can see if that's just something that's the program needs changed a little bit or something that can be addressed. And then given the context of the set project category allocation, what proposed ideas from the plan are important or timely to address in the next 5 years? So those are our list of questions. When we're looking at those questions, we want to do that within the framework of your equity plan and the urban renewal plan's overarching goals. So that's a lot to think about, but I think we've given you a good basic. Yes, Cassandra? We aren't going to prioritize tonight. So we're just going to talk more generally about the projects and programs. And you're exactly right. We talked about that also before tonight and said they're going to want to know those dollar numbers because you can't really say what you're going to do. And that will happen at the next meeting. Good question. Yes.
My question was related, so it might be something we talk about in the next meeting too. Mine was focused more on staff capacity, and if we're adding programs, should we also be considering removing them? But that might come in with prioritization for funding and staff capacity all at the same time. Okay, thanks.
Another question? So I haven't talked this much in a long time. So I think your staff has divisions. Nick is going to facilitate one group. I'll facilitate the other group, and staff will be at both places to help answer questions. We're going to give ourselves 10 minutes for each area, so we'll be calling 10 minutes. So we'll want to move quickly and not get into a lot of details, but have quick ideas.
Thank you, Elaine. So the easel that's to my right, we have Nick will be joined by Janine, along with Allison, Ashley, Lacey, John, and Roy. So it kind of fits where you're sitting over to that side of the room, except for Cassandra. You're going to be coming to this side. We're going to make some changes over here. But Cassandra, Nadia, Sarah, Edward, and Kevin will be on this side. So welcome, Mayor. You're going to be over on that far right side. And Elaine and myself will be here. Staff, go ahead and just fill in and be available to listen. And if you have finance and legal with 2 people here, you may want to split up so you can kind of listen in on either side. Any other questions? Chair Tiv nod.
Yeah, just a suggestion, once we're done with the small groups, take a brief break before we convene to go into discussion. I'm hearing lots of sniffles and coughs tonight, so I'm sure everyone could use some time to get water, just have a break.
Perfect, yes. And so 10 minutes per question. Feel free to take a break if you need to at any time. And then we will take a few minute break before we come back and report back out to the session. Okay, thank you.
pretty loud anyway, but we'll take this input and then work with staff and Nick and I and come to you next time with a framework for talking about priorities and looking at the input that we have and allocating to projects over time to get feedback on that so that we can then move forward to actually develop a plan. So,
can y'all hear me? Did we find the owner of the glass, the lens? This lens was found here.
It is our AV person's. He forgot it. It fell out of his pocket. Thank you.
Yep, no problems. We got it right here. So I was told a couple minutes ago to do this, so I'm going to do the best I can. And folks on our team, if you'd like to add anything, please add. When we talked about transportation and infrastructure, do you want me to just go through what we covered? Oh, okay. Yeah, so transportation and infrastructure, there was an emphasis on development and improvement of Beaverton Creek trails. There was a little bit of discussion about Allen Boulevard and kind of where Allen Boulevard fits in. We know that it's a certain part, and then is it possible to include a different part? We talked about adaptive traffic signals with an emphasis on bike and pedestrians specifically. So where do we need to put those? Talking about putting them in catalytic places versus like where we would want to put them. We also talked about the water, storm, and sewer upsizing. That was pretty big from our friends in fire. We focused on walkability, just generally speaking, and trying to, again, balance between like big catalytic investments and then like where things need to go because they need to go. Anything I missed, friends? Okay, on joint investment partnership programs, we talked a little bit about what is an employment district strategy. So what does that look like? What does that mean? We talked about potentially like, is there a partnership with organizations like Portland Community College and or businesses and or colleges? What does it look like to think about workforce development? How do we build more employment opportunities centrally? Are there ways for us to create jobs? Looking at a higher level employment strategy for the city. Friends, anything I missed? Okay. Next one, we talked about incentive programs. One of the topics that came up around preservation was really trying to focus on diversifying the businesses that we support. Sometimes bigger businesses are able to get more access to more funding, and so how do we ensure that organizations or businesses that are smaller or might not know how to navigate the getting funds for restoration and or preservation? So what does that look like? Or for tenant improvements. Sorry, I want to mix that up. But then also preservation. That was a big equity conversation. The climate, we talked a little bit about like, wow, we're doing these really great things. Are we showing off about them? We want to make sure that we continue to show off about those things as well. Anything I'm missing, friends? Incentive programs?
Yeah, we also shared a desire for brownfield investments to continue and how that's great that it comes from grants and not necessarily Bureau.
Thank you. That is circled here, so I missed it. Appreciate you calling it out. And then last but not least, for community identity upgrades, I commented that I could channel a little bit of Councillor Tivnon, thinking about like what gateway features look like when we welcome people into Beaverton. There were some comments about street lighting as well. There was a bigger conversation around like, does the Multicultural Center fit in? What does that look like with a public-private partnership? Because we have to be careful of public funds and how that is being used. There was some conversation around the master plan for the creek system and doing some daylighting as well. We talked a little bit about Arts and Innovation District. I joked that I'd like that to be named after me. I'm joking, but we just talked about what does it mean to name these districts and to have these neighborhoods. So, you know, we call it employment district, we call it West 5. Is that the name? Do we want to give it a name? Do we want to give these things specific names so that we become more of kind of a spot on the map? And there was a conversation on street lighting, specifically in central Beaverton, kind of around the library, and just making sure that folks feel safe and that wayfinding is possible and easy. Friends from my team, anything you guys want to add?
I think the only thing around the community identity, or the multicultural identity, is not just around the center, but just the concept of it feeling like a multicultural space. So in basically kind of all things. I mean, multicultural lighting's not really a thing, but the general way we name it, the sort of wayfinding, placemaking, et cetera.
delayed. Okay. We could almost just say ditto. We had so many similar conversations, a lot of similar themes. We have a couple things, so I think I'll just highlight maybe like where we maybe differed a little bit. For transportation and infrastructure improvements, we actually did talk a little bit about our Creekside Master Plan as being something that we want to really like take a good look at, and how can Bureau help like elevate, and how can we maximize like riparian easements to actually like create this amazing catalytic project where we can use Bureau funds to match with Metro funds, and you know, just like what is the potential there, and create our creek as becoming like a feature and an amenity that people want to spend time around. We also talked a lot about pedestrian connectedness. One of the things in our group, Nick asked us at the end of every time, is there something we should no longer focus on? And I think we had some consensus that we don't really need any more parking structures. And then it comes up later that we think wayfinding is actually super critical to use the investments and the spaces that we have. Okay, for joint investment partnership programs, I stepped out for a minute, but one of the things we talked about was, could we consider doing like low interest loans, just given the way that the market is right now? You know, interest rates are really high, so do we actually use like our money as a catalyst to create like this incentive to come in and invest? And then Susan volunteered to be the bank, and we also talked about, you know, are there maybe long-term leases that we could be considering, like truly long-term? Roy brought up the idea of like some places like to do like 90-year leases on ground floor so that they're continually infusing that program increment. So we kind of talked about some different things in that space. And also to continue to be not only opportunistic, but continue to be strategic with where we're looking for investment in land purchases. In terms of the incentive program page, like we all feel really strongly that this is really successful, that this is a really important investment that we make, and that our return on investment is really good there. No other notes. And for community identity and upgrades, we did talk a lot about like, you know, while we do have lots of neighborhoods, do people necessarily know them as destinations by their names? Is there branding opportunities? Is there other placemaking opportunities that we can take advantage of? Potentially even like ownership of the brand of the city, like get the city involved in like what is Beaverton to us. And we talked about using, like, we don't have much greenfield space at all, but like if we know that things are maybe not quite ready for those long-term developments, how can we use them in the interim to like create space, or to kind of just have I don't know, it's just, you know, like almost temporary, not like a couple weeks, but like maybe you have something for a couple of years because you know that the intention of that space is to come. And especially like with things like food carts and maybe bike storage or different types of things, there's things that we can use in a more temporary nature in there. But we all really acknowledged that we want to see some pretty amazing wayfinding that's not just like your typical little post with pointers, but like maybe some like in your face, like, hey, I'm Billy the Beaver. Hey, it's Beaverton. Welcome. And we really think there's opportunity there that we should embrace. And then there'll be a picture of Councilor Kimmy that just says fun. And what? Oh, and we would like a 20-foot beaver. And during the holiday season, its nose should be lit up like the white stag.
Okay, so with that, final questions from the crew. Did you have fun? Councilor Duger, did you have fun? Okay. Okay. First of all, thank you, board members. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Lane, Nick, for being here. And thank you, Jessica and Sue and your team for putting this all on. This is a big setup for us. We're typically pressing the Zoom button and hoping everything runs smoothly because they're all taking care of us. Tonight it was more than that. So thank you. And It was kind of, for me, kind of refreshing to be in this space with you, this space of, gosh, we've been all bundled up and not being able to spread our wings and elbow rooms. So I appreciate that. It gives me a little bit more energy as well. And so it's kind of exciting to go into this next series, working with Elaine and Nick, of bringing something back to you on January 23rd to react to. Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, Chair Tivnon, back to you.
Thank you. I believe, is this our last meeting of the year? So I think there's going to be chair conversations coming up fairly soon, and I've really enjoyed being your chair. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to do that. And unless there is anything further, I'll adjourn this meeting.